and welcome to our Board of Commissioner meeting for April 21, 2021. We apologize for a little bit of delay on the start. There was some business we had to attend to, which we will outline in a little bit more detail in a moment or two. But part of that was consideration of when we might even be able to get off of Zoom and start to resume back to a little bit of normalcy. But we all know that we're not out of the woods yet, and everybody needs to be very, very careful and get those vaccines as soon as you can and maintain the social distancing so that we can continue to fight to bring down the COVID-19 positivity rate and everything else. But with that, what I'd like to do is commence and call to order our Board of Commissioner meeting and ask you all if you'd be so kind to rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the nation which stands, one nation, under God, liberty, justice for all. All right, we will do our roll call protocol by asking just everybody to raise their hand, signifying they're present for our Township Secretary. Yes, and we have all 14 of us present and accounted for. So the first order of business is the approval of our minutes, which are minutes of a special meeting of the Board of Commissioners, which was held on February 24, 2021 and March 10, 2021, and a stated meeting of the Board of Commissioners, which was held on March 17, 2021, as distributed. I move for their approval. Is there a second? Thank you, Vice President Gavin. Any discussion or comment on that? Seeing none, all those in favor signify aye. Yep, the minutes are so unanimously approved. A couple announcements we have. As I indicated, the board did meet in executive session. It also did so on April 14th, as well as earlier this evening. And we received reports from our staff in connection with some litigation matters, some personnel matters, an update on the school district, as well as the coronavirus. Also updates on 1400 Mill Creek Road, updates on Centennial Road and Rolling Hill Park Cottage lease. Also want to point out that there's a cleanup weekend that is being held on Saturday, April 24 and Sunday, April 25 from 9 until 4 each day at the Township Public Work Complex. Residents may dispose of their refuse and recycling free of charge. Proof of residency is required. So recycling must be separated from the refuse and no household hazardous waste will be accepted. And from time to time, we read proclamations. This one seems extraordinarily appropriate given all that we've undergone in the past year plus. And that's a proclamation for what's known as public service recognition for 2021. So permit me, if you will, to read the proclamation. Whereas Americans are served by public servants at the federal, state, county, and municipal levels, and these individuals do the work that keeps our nation operating. And whereas public employees serve in many different capacities within our municipality and provide the residents of Lower Merion Township with many services contributing to the excellent quality of life in Lower Merion. And whereas the Board of Commissioners recognizes the efforts of our various municipal professionals who on a daily basis take pride in their responsibilities to our community, now therefore be it resolved that we, the members of the Board of Commissioners, join with the nation in recognition of the week of May 2 through May 8, 2021 as Public Service Recognition Week and call upon our citizens to commend the hard work and dedication of our township employees. And be it further resolved that we, the members of the Board of Commissioners, recognize the week of May 9 through May 15, 2020 as National Police Week and encourage Lower Merion residents to acknowledge the selfless service provided by our law enforcement officers. And be it further resolved that we, the members of the Board of Commissioners, declare the week of May 16th through May 22, 2021 as National Public Works Week and urge all citizens to recognize the vital contributions made to our community by public works personnel. And given, as I said, all that we have had for the past year from those people that perform those services on our behalf, recognition during that period of time is just simply not enough. And I know that all of us, and not just members of the Board of Commissioners, but everybody in the township thanks them very much for their service and continued service. With that brings us to the next section of our board meeting, which is known as public privilege of the floor. This is the section of our meeting where members of the public may address the board on non-agenda items, meaning anything which are public matters which fall within the jurisdiction of our authority, but are not listed on our agenda for this evening. I believe there are some folks, is that correct, Jody? Okay. All right. We have, excuse me one second. Is Ann there? Ann Earhart, sorry, had to locate you on my screen. Anna, you're on mute. If you'd be so kind as to introduce yourself and then please address the board.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity to speak. I just want to urge you all to address and approve a net zero carbon resolution soon, very soon, please. And I think it's really important that this resolution commit our township to several high-level goals. One is the conversion of township-owned or operated buildings and equipment to non-fossil fuel energy by 2035. Another is to convert all of the township vehicles to either electric or some other low emission vehicle before 2040 or by 2040, and transition of township owned or operated buildings and facilities equipped with HVACs to carbon-free energy sources by 2045. Really importantly, I think also it needs to commit you to helping us by educating and advocacy and any regulatory authority that is possible to support state and federal initiatives toward the above climate action goals, and to promote the same transition goals to our entire community, including businesses, institutions, and people like me. Well, maybe not like me, I'm already doing it as much as I can. I urge you to hire a sustainability director whose know-how and experience include transitioning onto clean, renewable sources of energy. This person could take and should take, I think, charge of creating the plan to get our township to these overall goals mentioned above. It's really important that there be multiple and specific milestones set in this plan, both so that the township can successfully implement each, but also so that we, the businesses and institutions and individuals living here, can effectively act in accordance. I think we're really out of time to kind of wander around and meander. Business as usual has gotten humanity into this mess, and I think we need to truly focus and get creative now. So I ask you to please incorporate the need to reduce greenhouse gas emissions into all decision-making going forward. What would the impact be? Should be a question, I think, on virtually everything. Please also incorporate the need to protect what is left of our natural environment, which, if human beings had left it less disturbed than we have, would already have done this job or most of it for us. That's my statement. Thank you very much for hearing me.
Thank you very much, Ann. There are a couple other people who have signed up for public privilege, and then we'll allow members of the board to respond if they so choose. So next is Nancy Winkler. Nancy, please. Again, if you need to unmute and announce yourself, and please address the board.
Hello, thank you very much. I'm Nancy Winkler. I'm here representing Ready for 100. Tomorrow is Earth Day. President Biden is convening world leaders to ask them to do more to combat global warming and to pledge that the U.S. will lead this effort. Bloomberg reports today that targets under discussion for the U.S. pledge include a range between 48 and 50% of a reduction in greenhouse gas emissions from the 2005 levels by 2030. Another target that is apparently being discussed is 53%. Cutting U.S. greenhouse gas emissions in half by 2030 would require broad action to clamp down on planet-warming pollution from power plants, automobiles, oil wells, and agriculture. The U.S. currently gets about 40% of its electricity from nuclear and renewables, but would have to double its carbon-free power to 80% by 2030 to put the country on track to curb emissions, enough to meet the new target, according to Amanda Levin, a policy analyst from the Natural Resources Defense Council. Work is happening at the federal level and the state level, and in the private sector even. In fact, this level proposed by President Biden is broadly endorsed by many major corporations. It's time for the township of Lower Merion and all of its residents and businesses and institutions to do their part too, to get on this path to a net zero carbon emissions. For several years, the EAC and commissioners and staff have been considering a resolution that would pledge to establish targets and interim goals that roughly meet the goals of the International Panel on Climate Change, and to create an energy transition plan that would guide the work that has to happen at the local level. Those of us from Ready for 100 have been active, urging the township to take this step. The goals are to transition the entire Lower Merion community to clean, renewable energy. I won't repeat what Ann has covered. It's basically the same thing. So please, we urge you to make this a priority and to take up a Ready for 100 compliant net zero resolution and pass it. Sorry about the background noise. This is the only place I seem to have enough internet coverage. 36 municipalities in southeastern Pennsylvania have already passed these resolutions, and many of them have been working diligently since last summer and should have their plans to meet these goals in the next few months. Narberth and Radnor Township already have their plans. We need to have a plan too. We thought we had an agreement for a resolution just before the start of the pandemic. That was over a year ago. Now there's a new RF 100 compliant version. It's fine. Please pass it. We know we need to make this transition, so let's get going. We can do it, and we need to do it. Thank you.
Okay, and thank you, Nancy. Next, we have Isabel Melvin.
Good evening, board members. Just a second, I have to find my notes. I'd like to thank members of the Board of Commissioners and township staff for your hard work every day, making this township a vibrant, healthy, forward-thinking community. Let's join other communities across the nation and the Delaware Valley by passing a carbon-free, clean energy, renewable energy promise for Lower Merion Township.
Isabel, we did lose your camera, not to rudely interrupt you. There we go.
I know, it's because I'm reading it off my phone. Sorry about that.
No, that's quite all right. If that's easier for you, I just wanted to make sure you were aware. Go right ahead.
Thank you so much.
Now you're on mute.
Okay, thank you.
Go ahead.
So let us join Upper Merion Township, Kennett Township, Radnor Township, City of Philadelphia, Conshohocken Borough, Phoenixville Borough, Westchester Borough, Downingtown Borough, East Bradford Township, Oakland Township, Schuylkill Township, East Pikeland, Pecupson, Tredyffrin Township, West Vincent, West Whiteland, East Fallowfield, Haverford Township, Swarthmore Borough, Lansdowne Borough, Springfield, Montgomery County, White Marsh Township, Ambler Borough, Cheltenham Township, Norristown, Plymouth Township, Narberth Borough, Conshohocken, West Norriton, Upper Merion, Hatboro Borough, Doylestown Township, Soulbury Township, Buckingham Township. They have all adopted resolutions to be 100% clean, renewable energy, and also parts of the nation: Concord, New Hampshire; Atlanta, Georgia; Chicago, Illinois; Asheville and Buncombe County, North Carolina; and Vancouver, British Columbia. The good news is that you don't have to reinvent the wheel. There are resources from the national, state, and local level to help us do this. There is a state convener who organizes monthly gatherings for the Ready for 100 PA groups to connect and learn from each other. In southeastern Pennsylvania, we have county conveners and working groups that work across counties. There is plenty of help and support. Back in the 60s and 70s, when I was a child, we did not pursue clean energy. Now we have the tools. Let's move to action, Lower Merion, on the Ready for 100. It's been too long a wait. Let's take the Ready for 100 resolution off the back burner and let's pass it today. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Okay, thank you very much, Isabel. Next, Julie Kine. You're on mute, Julie.
Hello, everybody. The UN warns that we have only 10 years to avoid irreparable damage to our planet. I urge you to adopt the net zero carbon resolution now to commit to 100% clean energy, clean electricity by 2035, and converting the township fleet by 2040, and all the remaining electricity by 2045. This includes the residents of the township. Over 30 communities, as was stated before, just in southeastern Pennsylvania, have made the commitment, as have over 170 communities nationwide. This includes 25% of the people who live in this country. The International Panel on Climate Change of the United Nations has made this commitment, and we can follow suit. We have the technology to do this right here. What we need is the will. Ready for 100, a program of the Sierra Club, has the resources to help us and is eager to work with us to make this transition. President Biden is about to hold an international climate summit tomorrow. He sees the need to work with other countries to stop climate change, but we need to work at the local level to make the necessary changes to ensure a healthy future for our children and the planet we share with all living things. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Julie. Let me just check. Do we have anybody else, Jody? All right. There was one other letter which we did receive from John Williams of Haverford, who addressed the issue about public access to the grounds of Haverford College. That has been circulated to all members of the board, and we thank Mr. Williams for bringing this to our attention. Do any members of the board wish to make any comments in connection with the excellent statements that were just made during public privilege? Much to my surprise, Commissioner Courtney.
Thank you, President Bernheim, and thank you to Ms. Earhart, Ms. Winkler, Ms. Melvin, and Ms. Kine for what you said. I will endeavor not to repeat, but I will likely touch on some of the same things. Tomorrow is Earth Day. And in light of that, I think it is worth revisiting some of the conclusions of the 2018 Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. Quoting from that report, global warming is likely to reach 1.5 degrees Celsius between 2030 and 2052 if it continues to increase at the current rate. So right now, we are fighting to make that a plateau. If we even allow another 0.5 degree of temperature increase to 2 degrees Celsius, the effects of climate change will be significantly worse. Quoting again, climate-related risks to health, livelihoods, food security, water supply, human security, and economic growth are projected to increase with global warming of 1.5 and increase further with 2 degrees Celsius. At this point, we're not even talking about stopping climate change. We're past that. Now we're talking about mitigation and adaptation. In other words, climate change is already going to force reductions to our quality of life. And the best we can hope for is to minimize that effect. So the report continues. There are a wide range of adaptation options that can reduce the risks of climate change. Pathways limiting global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius would require rapid and far-reaching transitions in energy, land, infrastructure, and industrial systems. These systems transitions are unprecedented in terms of scale, but not necessarily in terms of speed, and imply deep emissions reductions in all sectors. Avoiding warming increases can only be achieved if carbon dioxide emissions start to decline well before 2030. Sustainable development supports and often enables the fundamental societal and system transitions and transformations that help limit global warming. Such changes facilitate the pursuit of climate-resilient development pathways that achieve ambitious mitigation and adaptation in conjunction with poverty eradication and efforts to reduce inequalities. So that's all from the report. That's a lot of bad news, but there's a glimmer of hope in there. Mitigation is still achievable, but we have to make large-scale changes now. And there is opportunity for us to make those changes even at the local level. We need to adopt a net zero energy transition resolution, as the residents who spoke before me said. We need to join the Ready for 100, as many of our neighboring communities have already done. And we need to protect our natural environment and tree canopy, because those trees are our partners in carbon dioxide emissions reduction. And I'm not just talking about the 500 trees at the new middle school fields. We have $90,000 in escrowed funds for tree planting from a previously approved developments. Those trees need to go in the ground. We're working on a new natural features code, and it should have strict restrictions about tree removal and requirements for tree replacement. If we can create obligations for bamboo and for fencing, certainly we can do so for trees. We need to act now, because the options will only get worse as we delay. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Commissioner Courtney. Anybody else who wishes to make any comments in connection with that which was stated during public privilege? All right, seeing none, that will close that section, but with a comment to those who spoke, thank you. And this is something on our agenda, and was so well articulated by Commissioner Courtney, who has, from day one, when he first stood before us, stated that he was going to drive us as hard as he can, and he has been true to his word and then some. With that brings us to the next section of our meeting, and that is the section of public comment. And this is where members of the public have an opportunity to address the board on issues which are on our agenda. So I don't know if we have anyone else who has signed up for public comment, Jody? All right, 1 second. I believe we do have one potential speaker. Yep. Mr. Meyer?
Oh, hello.
If you'd be kind enough, although we all know you, to introduce yourself, and please go ahead and address the board.
Sorry, my name is Ben Meyer. I live at 247 Rock Glen Road, not far from Penn, Wynne Elementary School. I believe that's on the agenda tonight. I just wanted to, I'll keep it as short as I can. But I'm speaking only for myself, not the Civic Association or anything. The Penn Wynne Elementary School field and the new middle school were a big long-term volunteer effort from many generous with their talents and persistent folks. And I hope you'll vote to approve the plans before you tonight. Rick Churchill stood very strong and flexible when things were very tense with the field. And thank you to all the commissioners for your wisdom in allowing the parties to work out the differences, and along the way taking very difficult votes for Penn Wynne and field, and voting several times to allow the new middle school to exist, which basically those are somewhat linked. And thanks to Chris Leswing and Bob Duncan for getting us important answers whenever we asked. And this is a very humble thank you that would not have happened without your help. Also, thank you to the neighbors for interrupting their evenings to speak and write in. It's been a 6-year effort. And thanks even to the school board for the flexibility, and neighborhood stabilization seemed like a done deal. And then they reversed course and were flexible and raised the money for the new middle school. And then we hammered out an agreement, and gives us much needed closure on this issue. I think it's fair to say that many people put aside differences for the future of our kids. Even since most of the kids of ours won't be attending the middle school because they've kind of aged out at this point from this battle. We put the kids in the no mega schools and the open public access green space ahead of other things like money, our time. There was some compromise on historical views, compromise on some trees, compromise on steep slopes, and some traffic compromise and parking compromise, and some NIMBY type of concerns, which I don't want to put anybody down, but that's sometimes those are legitimate. Sometimes they can be a little overblown. But it was a real sacrifice for something bigger, and hopefully this result in the process reverberates in Penn, Wynne, and a broader Lower Merion community in time. I hope that Villanova residents, this is a little slightly off topic, but just for briefly, I hope the Villanova residents will find some common ground as they work through the new field issues that are similar to ours, perhaps. And it's great that you're letting the process work itself out there. I hope that important field does become a reality for Penn, Wynne, and Gladwin kids who will attend, and broader community, and hopefully is allowed to use it after hours. Once the required field functionality is assured for the students, I hope the environment will be considered strongly also. But some human-made and natural constraints, just like we had at Penn, Wynne, can be worked through. And
can you please wrap up, Mr. Meyer?
Yes, sorry. Sorry?
No, if you could just wrap up, I'd appreciate that.
Yes, sir. But anyway, having the open green space is a real blessing. So anyway, it was a 6-year thing, and I just think we should all be proud of Lower Merion School District, you all and your staff, for maintaining a strong effort and investment to achieve this reasonable compromise at Penn, Wynne, and a really terrific compromise at the new middle school. It's great that everybody was able to achieve that for the kids in the community. So thank you very much.
All right, and thank you for all those thank yous, because there are a lot of people that put in hard work for that. Next we have Paul. I would mispronounce your name if I tried. So Liebeskind, is that correct?
Yes, Liebeskind. Okay. I'll be very brief.
Okay, please.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Paul Liebeskind. I live at 1430 Remington Road. I'm president of the Penn, Wynne Civic Association. And I just want to reiterate what I've said at previous meetings, which is that the Civic Association is in support of the school district's applications for tentative sketch plan and conditional use plan and tentative sketch plan regarding 250 Haverford Road, Penn, Wynne Elementary School. I won't rehash everything that Ben Meyer said, but we do thank the school district and the staff for their hard work at achieving this compromise. And in particular, we're supportive of all the conditions that are attached to these plans, including what I believe are slight modifications suggested at last week's meeting, as well as one that might be suggested tonight. So thank you very much.
And thank you. And also, once again, thank you for recognizing just a lot of people, including yourself and the Civic, who were big participants in this. Right. Anybody else we have lined up for? All right. There are no other people who have signed up for public comment. This would be an opportunity for any members of the board who wish to comment on the comments. Okay. See none. Oh, I'm sorry. My apologies. Commissioner Zella.
Thanks, President Bernheim. So I'll jump in and say it, and it was said by the two members of the public who spoke, but it was not said last week. But a shout out to Commissioner Rick Churchill, because what I thought was a 2 or 3 year process, it was just said tonight to be a 6-year process. And, you know, Rick kept us informed all the way along and persevered. and of course, with members of the community and with our building and planning staff and management and the school district. But I give Commissioner Churchill a lot of credit for what occurred last week and what will be voted on in its final vote tonight with regard to Penn Wynne Elementary School. Thank you.
Well, thank you for that comments for the, they're well-deserved. For the record, we did say something about Commissioner Churchill, but he certainly deserves at least 2 nods, if not 3 or 4, for all the work we know that he's put into this. And excuse me, I'm sure the local community is greatly appreciative. With that, I need a sip of coffee. Okay, with that brings us to the next section of our meeting, which is the consent calendar. And there are 3 items that are being removed from consent. They're listed as G, which is Penn Wynne Elementary School conditional use, H, which is Penn Wynne Elementary School tentative sketch, and I, which is the Harrington High School preliminary plan. Does anybody wish to remove anything else from the consent calendar? Seeing none, then other than the removal of G, H, and I, then I will move for the approval of the consent calendar as amended. Do I have a second? Thank you, Commissioner Whalen. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor, please raise your hand indicating your approval. It appears to be unanimous, but just in case, any nays? Seeing none, the consent calendar as amended is so approved. Right. Then that's going to bring us to a couple other items, and we will get to those 3 items which were removed. But the first item on our agenda will be the approval for the advisory council appointments, which is found on page 20 of our packet. And that is to consider for approval the appointment of Daniel Sutton and Mackay San Miguel Paulson to the Environmental Advisory Council for 4-year terms, which would expire April 2025. And I will move for their appointment. Is there a second? Commissioner Durbin, thank you. Are there any comments to be made by any members regarding these appointments? Certainly Commissioner McKeon, then Commissioner Durbin.
I think these appointments are great appointments. I just wanted to say, and I've said this a few times too, being on the ad hoc nominations committee, we see so many great applicants and they seem to be getting better and better. And there were a lot of people who unfortunately we just had to turn down, and the EAC had some very specific needs, and these were really need-based appointments among a host of people who were extremely qualified. So if you applied and didn't get a position, I wanted to thank you, and please reconsider applying for something else down the road, because we were all very impressed. And thank Commissioner Durbin for guiding us through the process. And I think we found some very good applicants along the way.
Agreed. Yeah, Commissioner Durbin.
He took the words right out of my mouth. and to those people that we weren't able to appoint, I hope they'll lend us support volunteering to help the EAC.
Yeah, thank you. I think when all of us saw the list of resumes of the people who were applying, we were just in awe and have no idea how you were going to make these selections. And then to see the 2 that you selected, I'm sure that it was difficult, but they are, top-rate people. Somehow I would be terribly remiss why this may be a little bit off, but the last time I had dealing with Dan Sutton, I can tell you, I know he knows about open space. He and I coached 12-year-old girls in soccer together, and he was the head coach, and that's the only reason we won something, because he taught all the girls how to get the ball in open space and score. So I welcome him and Paulson onto the committee. They are excellent selections. So with that being said, we do need to have a vote. All those in favor, raising your hand, signaling aye for the approval. It appears to be unanimous. Welcome aboard. And Commissioner McKee and Commissioner Durbin, thank you for your hard work there. The next section that we have is in connection with 6 Bala Avenue. And this is to consider for approval authorizing the township secretary to advertise a public hearing and notice of intent to adopt an ordinance to amend the code of the township of Lower Merion, that being chapter 155 zoning, by amending the zoning map to rezone the medium density residential district MDR1 to institutional education districts, IE3, the property at 6 Bala Avenue in Bala Kinwood. Mr. Duncan has some comments on this.
Yes, I'm prepared to give you the full description of the rezoning. You did hear that last week at the Building and Planning Committee, so I'll reserve to your judgment as to whether you want that full presentation again or not.
Well, for those who are listening, if you can do the Reader Digest version, and then if there are any questions, people can ask. Is that all right?
I'm going to share my screen. This is a map of the area. The property in purple is the existing French International School. The property being considered for rezoning is on 6 Bala Avenue, shown in the hatched section there. Again, this is another view showing the zoning as it exists today, with the split zone in the residential at R4 and R6A under the old zoning, and the MDR1 under the new zoning. This is showing you the zoning districts in the vicinity of this property. Again, the French school in red is the IE3. The 6 Bala Avenue property is a property being proposed to be rezoned from MDR1 to IE3, and the zoning of the properties around it. This is giving you an aerial showing the French school here and the 6 Bala Avenue property at my cursor there. And this is showing you the modifications to the properties as a result of the recent expansion approval for the French school. This is the Bala Avenue property. They are preserving the existing historic house and adding addition to the rear as well as parking. This is just giving you a summary of the uses in the code. Skip through those. This is giving you an example of the key differences between the different zoning districts, which I'll go back to if anyone has questions, but otherwise I'll just skip through that quickly. And this is giving you photos of the existing house as it stands, and then with the proposed addition to the rear of that house under the proposal. This is outlining different sections of the comprehensive plan that this rezoning would be consistent with. And this is giving you standards for rezoning for your consideration when you make your final decision here. This is giving you meeting dates for which this will be before you and or the Planning Commission. So you have tonight's meeting, you'll be authorizing a public hearing. The public hearing will be scheduled for June 16th, where you would actually be considering the rezoning for adoption. So that's a quick summary, and I can answer any questions anyone has.
All right, thank you.
I'm sharing.
Return the screen. Thank you. Does anybody have any questions for Mr. Duncan on this? All right. So I'd just like to note that I see Mr. Weiss is here, and thank you for joining us. I don't know if there are any other questions that may be addressed to you, if anybody has any. Otherwise, we can move forward with the vote. I have moved forward. Is there a second on this? Thank you, Commissioner McComb. Any other discussion? Seeing none, then we'll call the vote. All those in favor, please raise your hand indicating your approval. Any objections, raising nay. The vote does carry unanimously, and I thank you all very much. I appreciate that. And Mr. Weiss, thank you for making yourself available.
Thank you.
All right. The next item on our agenda now takes us back to Penn Elementary School that you will find on page 10 of our packet of materials. And again, this is to consider for adoption a resolution approving a conditional use application. The applicant seeks conditional use pursuant to zoning code section 155 95.1 to hold 23 parking spaces in reserve in a new parking lot between the school and Haverford Road with access onto Haverford Road. Mr. Duncan, again, is there some comments you wish to make, albeit this has been before?
Yes, there's a couple of conditions, one that needs some minor edits, and the other is a new condition to close what could be considered a loophole. And I'm going to share my screen again. So one of the issues that came up over the course of the last week was you have the tentative sketch before you and the conditional use before you. There was a separate application made by the school district to extend the deadline for the temporary classrooms to June 2023. So this tentative sketch and conditional use kind of incorporates that idea that the classrooms would not come down until at the latest June 30th, 2023. But technically you have that separate application out there that requires action. So rather than bring that forward separately for a decision, our thought was to incorporate a condition into this decision that kind of clears that up. So what we're suggesting is that a condition be added that would read, the plan approval incorporates a temporary classroom extension request submitted under application 16-001A, and the temporary classrooms must now be removed by June 30, 2023. This application is rendered moot by this decision and requires no further action by the township. So that would clean up what someone might consider as a loophole, since you haven't acted yet on the actual application to extend the classrooms. That ties it back into this application. And if you grant this approval tonight, that would include that extension as well. The other condition that just required some cleanup, the wording of this condition was not completely consistent with the agreement between the school district and Penn, Wynne Civic and neighbors. So we did some minor modifications working with the Civic to make sure that this is consistent with that. So I'll read that to you as well. While parking is held in reserve, an additional traffic impact and parking assessment will be conducted when the student enrollment and then adding and/or faculty and then adding and staff increases by 10% over the numbers, and then deleting of faculty and staff and provided by the post-development assessment. So this makes it clear that we're talking about faculty and staff associated with that student enrollment increase. And I think that is consistent with the Penn, Wynne Civic. I have discussed it with representatives of the Civic. I've also discussed it with the attorney for the school district, and both were in agreement that this would clean that language up to be consistent with the agreement that they have both approved.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Duncan. A procedure, I'll tell you what we're going to do is I'm going to move for consider the adoption of the resolution for approving the conditional use with the new condition for the tentative sketch as just outlined by Mr. Duncan, and the amendment to condition number 4 as outlined by Mr. Duncan. We have a second, Commissioner Churchill. Thank you. Any further comment by any members of the board? Seeing none, then we'll call the vote for the approval of the conditional use as just amended. All those in favor, please raise your hand, signaling your approval. Any objections? Seeing none, it does therefore pass unanimously. That then brings us to the next item, which is on our agenda, which would be the Harrington High School preliminary plan. Timeout. We also have to do that after the conditional use, the tentative sketch. My bad. So hold on one second. Back to Penn, Wynne. So for this, which is then on page 12 of our packet, I will move for consider for approval the tentative sketch plan, the plan dated February 21, 2020, last revised February 12, 2021. prepared by Chester Valley Engineers, Inc. Shows the removal of the temporary modular classrooms, construction of 4,400 square foot hard surface play area, and construction of porous pathways. Conditional use approval is required for the 23 parking spaces held in reserve along Haverford Road, which we have just done. So with that conditional use approval, I would move for approval of the tentative sketch. We have a second. Thank you, Commissioner Churchill. Do we have any further questions or comment? Seeing none, then I will then call the vote. All those who approve, please raise your hand indicating your approval. Any objections? Seeing none, then the tentative sketch is now approved unanimously. Now, that brings us to Harrington High School and its preliminary plan, which is found on page 16 of our agenda. And this is to consider for approval a preliminary plan, a preliminary land development plan. The plan dated January 8, 2021, last revised March 18, 2021, prepared by Chester Valley Engineers, shows construction of 4,865 square foot classroom addition and construction of 29 surface parking spaces, shown in a new west lot, which consists of 22 new parking spaces and 7 existing parking spaces relocated from elsewhere on the site. The plan also shows the installation of 36,394 square feet of additional concrete pads and installation of stormwater management before actually moving it. Mr. Duncan, is there something you wish to educate us about?
Yes, a number of what I would consider to be minor cleanup to the language and the conditions, and then one amendment to a condition that's more substantive. So the first is the description of the plan in the second sentence, just revising that the plan date revision was March 19th, not March 18th. In condition number 1, the letter should be dated March 29th, not March 26th. And then in condition number 8, it reads any and impervious. It should read any impervious. And then in condition number 14, towards the end of that sentence, it says, but not limited staggered. It should be, but not limited to staggered. So they are all just minor cleanups. And then there is one modification to condition number 5, and I'll share my screen again. So I have the original condition up on the screen, also with some modifications that we distributed earlier today, and then one further modification that was distributed late this afternoon. So some of you may not even had a chance to read that yet. So the original condition is the text without any underline, and then the underlined text is what was distributed earlier, and I'll go through that real quickly. Again, we're referring to condition number 5 and the pathway that would be required across the front of the Harrington High School property. So the added language is the pathway shall be designed as level as possible with no steps. We are concerned about specifically referring to ADA and whether that was possible because some of the slopes and the existing obstructions. So this would clarify that it's going to be as level as possible, and there wouldn't be any steps in this pathway. And number 2, shall be maintained in good repair and cleared during inclement weather by the applicant. That's just a standard maintenance and obligation. And number 3, and shall continue from property line to property line and be located as close to 8th Avenue as possible. So this was language that in meeting with Commissioner Gavin and Commissioner O'Neill, as well as school district representatives, we modified this to include that language. And then towards the end of the day, in a meeting with the school district, they had requested that we add some language to the end of that basically would be the language in uppercase, which would add without requiring relocation of any utility poles. Near should be meter pits or utility owned devices. So that's to make it clear that the pathway will be as close as we can get to the street, but recognizing that some of these utility obstructions will require the pathway to be located behind those utilities, and in those cases would be a little bit further from the street. So with those changes, I think both the school district representatives and the impacted commissioners, in their words, have accepted this change, and I would be happy to answer any questions.
So similar to the process with Penn, Wynne, I will move to consider for approval the land development, the preliminary plan with the amendments as outlined by Mr. Duncan and the modification to number 5. Do I have a second for that? Thank you, Vice President Gavin. Are there any commissioner comments and or questions? Seeing none, I will then call the vote. All those in favor for the approval of the preliminary land development as so amended, raise your hand signaling your approval. Any objections? Seeing none, it does indeed get approved unanimously. And Mr. Lill, I'd like to acknowledge you being here and thank you for participating. And I see Mr. Frommold, who popped on and off the screen for a moment. Thank you as well.
Thank you, President Bernheim. Thank you to the Board of Commissioners, and Bob, thank you directly. It's always a pleasure.
Great. That then brings us.
Thank you.
Okay. That then brings us to the next item on our agenda. This is in connection with our Finance Committee, and that will be found on page 33 of our packet. And the first item is to consider the approval of award of a contract for annual supply of roadway maintenance materials to the following bidder in accordance with bids received on Thursday, March 11, 2021 at 11 a.m. And the recommendation of our Chief Financial Officer with the approval of our Director of Public Works. And the 4 items are listed on our packet with Allen Myers LP and 4 of them to Glasgow Inc. I see Mr. Traub is here. Would you like to tell us anything before we proceed?
Just a couple of points I'll raise. This is an annual contract you see about this time every year. It contains estimated quantities. Overall, there's a 2.2% increase versus the prior year, really driven by the increase in item 1, the asphalts, and item 9, some of the sub-base materials used in road repairs. You do see the bid tab and also the multi-year price sheet that we include, which kind of shows you how these unit prices have changed over time. We haven't used Allen Myers for this specific project in several years, but they are a known entity to us in Glasgow. They're familiar vendors, done good work with the township. So we have no problem moving forward with these bids.
All right. So I will make the motion for approval of the awards as set forth. Is there a second? Thank you, Commissioner Zeloff. Any other comment or even questions for Mr. Traub? Seeing none, we'll then call the vote. All those who wish to approve, please raise your hand, signifying your approval. Any objections? Seeing none, this is then approved unanimously. Anthony, there's a question regarding your vote. Were you in favor? Commissioner Stevenson?
Yeah, I was using Commissioner Gavin's internet, so I was a little delayed. I apologize. It was a yay.
Yeah, okay. All right. Thank you. All right. That then does bring us to our next contract to be considered, and that is to consider for approval award of a contract for the annual paving equipment rental to the following bidder in accordance with bids received Thursday, March 11, 2021, with a recommendation of our CFO and Director of Public Works. This is to asphalt care equipment. The bid amount is $120,000. Mr. Traub, again, is there something you wish to add to this?
Just real quickly, this contract typically comes up every few years. We do have renewals in it, so it's not every year. Asphalt Care Equipment is the current holder of the contract. They have been so for many years. They work with a lot of municipalities. Again, we've had positive experience. Just as a note, when you look at the bid tab, the other bidder did not have a bid bond. That's a red flag. The other thing, just when you look at the price differential, there was no bid on item 3 by the second vendor. So Asphalt Care actually on all the items that were bid actually was the low bidder as well. So just to point that out. So we have no issue moving forward with this bid as well.
Any questions for Mr. Traub? Commissioner Zell?
Thank you, President Bernheim. Eric, isn't this essentially a bid based on an hourly rate for rental of the equipment?
I'm not sure I don't think it's based on an hourly rate. I think it's based on a daily and a kind of a per month cost because we use them mainly in the paving season and such. I don't think it's based on an hourly rate. But
it says number of hours, but daily rate's probably what it is. Do you know a comparison to the rate, whatever the rate is, to when we last did this?
I don't off the top of my head because one thing is there's also CPI adjustments. So I could, I'll look up the previous contract and I'll send that to you, but be aware that I think there's probably going to be about a 3-year gap. So if you see a 10% increase, that's over a multi-year period, but I can send that to you.
Great. Appreciate that. Thank you.
Any other questions for Mr. Traub? Seeing none, I will then move for the approval of the award of the contract as set forth. Is there a second to that? Thank you, Vice President Gavin. Any further discussion? Seeing none, we'll then call the vote. All those in favor of the approval of the contract, raise your hand. Any objections? Seeing none, it is unanimously approved. That brings us to our next contract award for consideration, and that's the approval of a contract for concrete curb, sidewalks, and ramps to Hamilton Contractors, Inc. The bids being received on April 8, 2021. Again, this is with the recommendation of our CFO and Director of Public Works. The bid amount is $82,812. And again, Mr. Traub, do you wish to educate us on any aspect of this?
So this is another annual contract. We had a strong number of bidders. A local vendor based here in Ardmore is the low bidder, Hamilton Contractors. So Public Works maintains a list of locations in need of repair. Just for edification, this is not in relation to any new sidewalk construction. This is repairs to existing sidewalks, usually damaged by township shade trees. Positive, the bids came in just a little bit lower than we expected. And again, no issue with moving forward with this contract that we see.
Are there any questions for Mr. Traub? All right, seeing none, I will then move.
Dan,
I'm sorry, Commissioner Zell.
Just a comment. This is a requirements contract, I believe, Eric. So this is not necessarily a commitment for this amount, but rather based on a requirements or based on need.
That is correct. And anybody else? All right. Seeing no further questions, I'll then move for its approval. Is there a second? Thank you, Commissioner Zeloff. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor of approval, please raise your hand. Any objections? Seeing none, this then carries unanimously. That brings us to our next item, which is to consider for approval ratification of an emergency purchase related to snow plowing and hauling of township parking lots totaling $18,552 in 2020, $75,094 in 2021, provided by J. Master Hauling, Inc. Is there any information on this, Mr. Traub?
Yeah, so you have an issue briefing on this. So for background, so previously, a couple of years ago, we did actually issue a contract for these services. The problem is you don't know necessarily when it's going to snow. So we issued a contract for this. We had someone on on a contract. It never snowed that winter. We went to renew the contract. They had no interest in it. And also when we had bid this contract previously, we only had one bidder. So what we opted to do this year is we did reach out to a couple of firms and really ended up only using this one firm. We had agreed upon pricing. So we weren't having any kind of, snowstorm type pricing or anything else of this nature. And they provide those services. So, looking for approval in conformance with, applicable procurement rules, but happy to answer any other questions the board might have.
Does anybody have any questions of Mr. Trout? Seeing none, then I will move for approval of the emergency purchases as outlined. Is there a second for that? Vice President Gavin, thank you very much. Any other discussion? Seeing none, we'll call the vote. All those in favor of approval, please raise your hand. Any objections? Seeing none, this also then carries unanimously. And that brings us to our next item. And this is to consider for approval authorizing the Township Secretary to advertise notice of a public hearing and intend to adopt public hearing attempt to adopt an ordinance enacted pursuant to the Code of Township of Lower Merion, Chapter 126, Sewers, fixing the amount of the annual sanitary sewer rental fee and establishing the amount of $4.51 is the charge for each property connected to the township sanitary sewer system for each 1,000 gallons of water consumed, and fixing the amount of the annual sanitary sewer rental fee for each property directly connected to the City of Philadelphia sanitary sewer system as that amount charged by the City of Philadelphia for such service. Mr. Trout, would you like to educate us on this as well?
Yeah, so you have an issue briefing before you and a draft ordinance. I'm going to walk through the presentation slides here, share my screen, and I think this will hopefully answer all hopefully relevant questions from the board. So just as a review, the Sanitary Sewer Fund, it's an enterprise fund. Those user fees that people see in the mail once a year, that's really what pays for all the costs of this fund. It's required, as President Bernheim alluded to, by Chapter 126. You can see that obviously this fee is based upon water consumption, as it has been for many years. What does the sewer system pay for? Over 230 miles of sewer lines, 17 pumping stations, the people that maintain it, keep it in a good working order, and it's a lot of maintenance, especially in some sections of the township which are a little bit older, and we're currently billing over 16,600 counts. The revenues anticipated for 2021 pretty much unchanged to the prior year. The primary source is the sewer rate, obviously. The billing will fluctuate year to year with water consumption and water conservation efforts, and COVID had some odd impacts, I think, this year. And obviously, we also still offer a credit for those systems that might be connected to sprinklers or pools or something else for those who have a registered and operating special meter. In terms of the billing for this year, we've had the same fee since 2012, so we're heading up on 10 years here. Overall, we have an estimate in here for the billable gallons. We've received the information from Aqua for this year. We're still fine-tuning and going through some of that data, so we're estimating 1.6 million billable gallons. However, that might end up being 1.58. It might end up being 1.61. We'll see. The other thing that we've seen, which shouldn't surprise people, is generally we've seen that commercial properties, generally usage was down in 2020, which makes sense given the pandemic, and residential properties generally are a little bit higher. In terms of the expenditures from the Sanitary Sewer Fund, on this page, you'll basically see 95% of those expenditures, the largest being the treatment costs of the sanitary sewer, then followed up by the personnel expenses and debt service. That's roughly about 75% between those. three categories, and then the indirect costs paid back to the general fund. Utilities obviously is a major component to run all those pump stations and all those pumps, and all the equipment and the equipment rentals that go along with it make up the rest of that, the vast majority of the expenditures in the fund. So where the fund is, we've seen for several years that the sanitary sewer fund is in a very strong financial position. That continues now when you look at overall fund balance position. That position is less strong when you look at recent kind of income statement in terms of there was a deficit in 2019, another one in 2020, and we're projecting another one in 21. Where that really comes from is mainly an overall long-term multi-year decline and really lack of growth in billable water consumption. If those revenues are really stagnant or declining, it's difficult to keep up with the pace of expenditures. The other thing we've had less connection fees, grant revenues. We had some larger one-time payments into the fund due to those reasons in, I think, 2016 and 2017. So that has come down a little bit. That being said, this is obviously still a very manageable deficit without a fee increase for 2021. The expenditures, we're projecting them just about on par with previous year. We are anticipating, as you see, a decrease in that fund balance reserve. We'll be monitoring that going forward, but still would, if all comes to fruition, end up at about 24% of overall expenses. So still a very strong fund balance. And as a reminder, our policy in this fund is roughly right about 10%. I did want to just take a second to look forward. Because we've had a couple of years of deficits and anticipating another one, where do things look like they're going? And unless we see some sort of a big rebound in billable water consumption, which I wouldn't necessarily anticipate, some sort of connection fees on a significant basis, or we're able to really change the trajectory in those main expenditure categories. So I don't expect anything on the treatment costs unless the sewer volume really drops, because we're in an agreement with Philadelphia Water for another 5 or 6 years. Debt service, that's always something in terms of the capital improvement plan and the investments we make in the sewer system. That's something that we talk about. Personnel costs, obviously, is always an ongoing topic. So unless we're able to really change something on either side to a significant degree, what we'll probably see is a decrease in that fund balance percentage over the next couple of years. And in that 2023, if we have some better results, maybe 2024, there is going to come a time where we're going to have to increase the sewer rate. That's the life and the nature of these enterprise funds. We've been on an amazing good run. We hope it will continue. But I do think it is coming in the not too distant future. In terms of where our rate is, I think it's worth pointing out, not only is our rate the lowest, and these are the only real kind of area municipalities that bill on the same basis. So you're not going to see Upper Marion here because they have like a flat billing structure. So we're billing on a consumption basis in our area. And what I would point out is you look at Marple, Radnor, and Newtown. I went back and in 2016, when I did this presentation, Marple was at $6.06, Radnor was at $5.90, and Newtown was at $6.07. So what we've seen actually in the area, which generally does make sense for what you hear, is an increase in those utility rates, especially as people are having to invest in systems that are getting, in a lot of places, on 50, 60, 70 years old, and paying for some of the environmental mandates and things of that nature. So in general, where the township is obviously in a enviable position. And the Lower Marion sewer bill for most single family dwellings is probably in the neighborhood $240 to $265 a year on average, or about $20 to $22 a month. So you compare that to your water bill, it probably compares pretty favorably. So what the board has before it tonight is basically the advertisement for the ordinance. What happens is then Next month, there'll be a public hearing on this ordinance. After approval, then the sanitary sewer bills would be mailed out to customers. That occurs right around June 1st. The bills are payable similar to property taxes, and there's a 60-day discount period, 60-day flat period, and then penalty periods throughout the rest of the year. With that, I'd be happy to answer any questions that any commissioners might have.
You could return.
Yep, unshare my screen.
Yeah, thank you.
There you go.
Anybody have any questions for Mr. Trout, Commissioner Courtney, and then Commissioner Simon?
Thank you, President Bernheim. Hi, Eric. I apologize I didn't email these questions to you beforehand, and if they require some math, you can just email them back to me. I'm curious, what we're 14%, or we're at 24% of our policy goal, or of our fund balance, and our policy goal is 10%. So what's the dollar amount of that 14% difference that's sitting in our sewer fund right now?
Ask me your other question. I'm going to try to calculate that.
My other question is, if in 2 years we dip down to 6%, what will our sewer rate need to be to get back to 10?
I think on both of those, I'm going to punt and then actually get you the most accurate answers rather than the back of the envelope calculations.
Email is fine. I appreciate it. Thank you.
All right, and you can currently circulate to the board. They're a good question.
Yep.
Right, Commissioner Sinai.
Thank you, President Bernheim. So two of my questions were Commissioner Courtney's questions, and I also failed to send them in advance. So I won't repeat those. But Eric, I was trying to figure out a little bit about what's going on here. So we're running this deficit, and but our expenses haven't gone up really very much at all, right? So is the deficit because people are using less water? Is that?
Well, I would say it's because over time, people are using less water. If you look back at that slide on the billable water consumption, you'll see that there were certain years we were at like 1.3 or 1.73. Even I have the numbers in front of me right here. And even in 2016, we were about 1.7. And then we've been around the 1.6, so it was down to 1.56 over previous years. So again, what happens when you get a new toilet, a new washing machine, any of those sort of things? They use less water. When there's retrofits to commercial buildings, I would imagine that they're generally using less water. So generally, I think that's a very large part of that portion. We have been able to keep expenditures relatively flat over the last couple of years. We were about 8.3 million in 18, and we've been right around just under the $9 million mark. 19 is really when we started to see a little bit of an uptick in the treatment costs from Philadelphia as well. But we've been able to keep that mark at a pretty good, not a huge rate of increase. So where the deficit's coming from is really not in a significant growth in expenditures. It's really the revenues is 90% the sewer rate. And if that billable water isn't really changing, then it's flat every year. So it's not that different than discussions we've had over several years on the solid waste fee. Is if it's flat to declining in terms of subscriptions, and that's 90% of your revenue base, you don't really have anywhere else to go. And so if expenditures are only going up even 1.5%, 2% a year, that deficit is going to occur and is going to expand over time.
Yeah, I have to say, you're correct. I mean, I think the expenditures are basically completely flat, almost virtually completely flat between 2020 and 2021.
Yeah.
And I think there's a difference here between this and the solid waste fee. I mean, it's terrifically water conservation. If we hold the rate flat and people are using less water, they are paying less tax, right? I mean, that's the reason that revenues have come down, is because people are actually paying less tax. Which is great, but it seems like the sanitary sewer system, until we renegotiate things with Philadelphia, is largely a fixed cost system with some growth in expenses, right? And so, it makes sense to apportion it based off of water usage, but we're doing a fixed cost apportionment. And So I guess, if we didn't have such an excess fund balance, is what we would do simply to, apportion whatever the costs were based off of water usage to kind of make up whatever gap there was. Right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And so I guess my only substantive comment then, now that I understand what's going on here, is like with the other situations where we're kind of running the systemic deficit, and especially because what's going on here is that people have literally saved dollars in taxes because we have not raised a rate, and therefore their tax has gone down. Having a smoother glide path through to budget balance is something that we should always strive to do. And these are not going to be big dollar amounts no matter what, but you probably kick into a 10% rate increase in the tail year the way you have it modeled out. And I'd rather see single digit increases rather than double digit increases, to the degree that when we start getting to 2022, 23, that would be great.
Yeah, and that's something, the board can discuss. We'll see how 2021 ends and what 2022 looks like. Again, we might have still a little bit of an odd year this year with water consumption based upon COVID and things of that nature, what's happening in commercial buildings versus residential. So there could be some oddities, and that could be something for the board to decide if the fund balance were to come down to around 10%, 12%. Obviously it's the board's discretion of whether or not they want to do anything with rates as it is at any point. The only other thing I would just comment based on what you said, it is still 5+ years away, but when there is renegotiation with the city of Philadelphia, that will have an impact. That's something we've been in a 35-year agreement. That's something that's still a little bit far out on the horizon. Not sure what obviously direction that would go, but that is a huge piece of this fund and something just for the board as we move forward through the next couple of years to be cognizant of.
Okay. Thank you very much, Eric. Thank you, President Bernheim.
Certainly. Anybody else with any other questions for Mr. Trout? All right. Seeing none, then, other than commenting that I suspect the pandemic will have some impact on what happens. Certainly the number of people staying home, residential, or go try to find a pool contractor. We're pretty busy in our township. But in any event, I will then officially move to consider for approval of authorizing the township secretary to advertise the notice of the public hearing as referenced. Is there a second for that? Thank you, Commissioner McKeon. All those in favor, please raise your hand, signaling your approval. Any objections? Seeing none, this is then approved unanimously. So there's another item that we need to address, and we're going to do this in 2 steps because concerns rejection of certain bids for custom tailored police uniforms, but it is not on our agenda. So the first thing we need to do is, as a board, is agree to place this on our agenda, and I will move to do so, and we will get a further explanation as to the substance of this from Mr. Traub once it's placed on the agenda. So can I have a second for that approval? Thank you, Commissioner Churchill. All those in favor of placing this item on our agenda this evening, raise your hand, indicating your approval. Any objections? Seeing none, then we will go to the second portion of this, but having this been placed on the agenda, and it's to consider for approval rejection of all bids due to the number of bids and changes in uniform needs for custom tailored police uniforms, which were received on April 15, 2021. I'm going to ask Mr. Traub if he'd be kind enough to explain that.
All right, thank you, President Bernheim. So we've been having ongoing discussions over the last week since we had this bid with the police, and police uniforms are not necessarily a straightforward, easy matter. The police are very specific about certain needs, cuts, tailors, things of that nature. So basically what we have a situation here is that the bids that were put forward, upon review by the police department in concert with the finance department, there's certain items in there that we feel like the township is going to be better off buying those and purchasing those off of state contract. So we don't have the ability to only do a partial bid award. So what we would prefer to do is to reject the bids. That's why we want to do it right now at tonight's meeting. So that way we can quickly rebid this project over the next couple of weeks and bring it back to you in the June cycle at some point. If we didn't do that tonight, we wouldn't be able to reject until May. Then we probably aren't able to get back to you by July. The other thing is we do believe by kind of, pardon the pun, but by tailoring the bid list, we actually believe we're actually going to have a few more vendors who will be able to propose. We still think that the costs are going to be very similar because we're really dealing with only a couple of distributors and then the various companies that have the contracts to distribute those uniforms. But still, anytime you have more people competing, hopefully, it could lead to an improved pricing. So we discussed this with the police over the last couple of days. Sorry for the short notice, but we think it's the most efficient way for us to quickly procure the police uniforms that are needed.
Okay, so I just want to make clear, I did not feed Mr. Traub that line, but if anybody has any other comments or questions from him. All right, seeing none, then I will officially move for that we consider for rejection of all of the bids as just outlined. Do I have a second for that? Commissioner Gerben, thank you very much. And I ask all those in favor of approving the rejection, raise your hand indicating your approval. Any objections? Seeing none, it is so affirmed. And thank you very much, Mr. Traub. That then brings us to the next item on our agenda, which is found on page 59 of our packet. And this is to consider for approval the appointment to the Civil Service Commission of Andrew Thompson as a member for a 6-year term, which would expire in April 2027, and Barry J. Levin as an alternate. Do I have a second for that? Commissioner O'Neill, thank you very much. Any comments in reference to this? Right. Once again, I know that we always have just a flood and a lot of top-notch people, and this is certainly no exception to that rule. So seeing no comments, I will move for the vote. All those who wish to approve the appointment, please raise your hand. Any objections? Seeing none, I thank them all. Vote. They are so approved. And that then brings us to the next item, which again is to consider for approval the appointment of Kim Andrews and Joseph McNeil to the Shade Tree Commission for 5-year terms, which would expire in April 2026. Do I have a second for that? Thank you, Commissioner McComb. Any discussion on these appointments? Yes, Commissioner Stevenson.
Thank you, Mr. President. I just want to congratulate both of the residents for being appointed, but particularly Mr. McNeil, who has been an advocate for the environment and also his background knowledge for the Shade Tree Commission. So it is a great addition to both of them. Thank you, Mr. President.
Okay, thank you very much. Any other comments? Seeing none, I'll then call the vote for the approval of those appointments. Please raise your hand indicating your approval. Any objections? Seeing none, they are unanimously approved, and I thank them both for stepping forward for their service. That then brings us to the next item on our agenda, and this is for the adoption of an ordinance, in particular, an ordinance to amend and have bearing ordinance number 4206, to amend ordinance 4206 adopted December 16, 2020, making a change in certain appropriations, some of which have proven to be larger than needed and some to be insufficient, and authorizing the proper township officers to make the required transfers from and to appropriations heretofore made of receipts not heretofore estimated or from unappropriated fund balances. This ordinance was authorized for advertisement at a stated meeting of the Board of Commissioners on March 17, 2021, and duly advertised in the April 11, 2021 edition of the Mainline Times and Suburban. So I would move for the adoption of this ordinance, which will bear number 4211. And do we have any questions that we need present and have answered by any of our staff? I see no questions from the board. Is there a second for this motion? Yes, Commissioner McComb, thank you very much. Any further discussion on this? Seeing none, we would require a roll vote, but we will do it in Zoom world by a raise of the hands of those who are approving the authorization of the, are approving the amendment to the ordinance. If you raise your hand indicating your approval. Any objections? Seeing none, it therefore does carry unanimously. And then that then brings us to our next order of business for this evening, and that is for an ordinance to amend the code of the Township of Lower Merion, Chapter 145, entitled Vehicles and Traffic, Articles 15, schedules by imposing a stopping or standing prohibited restrictions on both sides of Mill Creek Road from Old Gulf Road to Crosby Brown Road, and on the north side of Old Gulf Road from Mill Creek Road east for a distance of 80 feet, and by imposing a parking prohibited at all times restrictions on the south side of Old Gulf Road from Mill Creek Road east for a distance of 425 feet. This ordinance was authorized for advertisement at a stated meeting of the Board of Commissioners on March 17, 2021, and duly advertised in the April 11, 2021 edition of the Mainline Times and Suburban. So I will move for the adoption of what will become Ordinance 4212 if approved. And see if there's a second. Commissioner Zeloff and Commissioner Grimes simultaneously. Thank you both. Is there any questions or comments from any members of the board? Commissioner O'Neill, I'm not sure if that was a scratch of the eye or a raise of the hand. Scratch of the eye, got it. Okay, then I will quickly make a comment for this. This is by the Mill Creek Park and is just a great idea, which was brought up by some of the neighbors and the uses of the park, because parking indeed was a problem and was just literally the accident waiting to happen. So I hope this quickly gets approved. And with that comment, I will then call the vote and ask all those who do approve to raise their hands indicating so. Any objections? Seeing none, this is then approved, and Ordinance 4212 will now have some stop signs by that Mill Creek Park. That brings us to the last item on our agenda, which is an ordinance to amend the Code of the Township of Lower Merion, Chapter A164, Civil Service Commission Rules and Regulations, to add to the general qualifications for persons seeking a position as a police officer that, in addition to the personal quality of good moral character, they possess emotional stability displayed in their mental acuity in stressful situations, and the ability to exercise consistent good judgment to provide for the delivery of notice of examination and disciplinary charges by certified mail, registered mail, or confirmed electronic delivery. This ordinance was authorized for advertisement at a stated meeting of the Board of Commissioners held on March 17, 2021, and duly advertised in the April 11, 2021 edition of the Mainline Times and Suburban. So I will move for the adoption of Ordinance 4213. Do we have a second for that? Thank you, Commissioner Whalen. Is there any further questions or discussions by members of the board on this? We have discussed this before. Seeing none, I will then call the vote for approval and ask all those who approve to be kind enough to raise your hand, signifying you do so. Any objections? Seeing none, this then does carry unanimously. That brings us, though, to the next section of whether we have any unfinished or news business that anybody wishes to raise for the meeting this evening. Seeing none, then what I would like to do is thank you all for your very hard work this evening and wish you all a good night, because we are hereby adjourned.
Good night.
Night, everybody.